In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void. And darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Hello, welcome back to Bethel Evangelical Free Church Hanley on YouTube. I'm Pastor Charmley. In this video I'm continuing to look at these old works of Scottish theology, the Cunningham Lectures. Lectures that deal with all kinds of departments. Now we have reached the 21st series of Cunningham Lectures, not the 21st video. There are 3 volumes I don't have, and there's one that so far defeated my attempts to talk about it. But the 21st series, 1909, period where the free churches in England are at peak growth. Scotland also. It seems a period of great optimism, but optimism that will very soon be shown to be largely unfounded. Now the 21st series of the Cunningham Lectures reflects this mood of rather facile optimism. The divine work in Creation and Providence, the 21st series of Cunningham Lectures by J. Oswald Dykes, M.A., D.D., there we are. Now, one of the interesting things of the Cunningham Lectures is that they represent men at various points in their careers. The previous Cunningham Lectures was by William Fairweather, and William Fairweather, 1903, he has been at Dunakia for 20 years, but he's got another 40 years to serve. So he's a man who is well into his career, but at the prime of his life. We have other men. Harry Kennedy, when he gave his Cunningham Lectures, he was about to enter in to the great work at New College. He's become a professor at Knox College. So you've got men at various points in their careers. Oswald Dykes in 1909 is towards the end of his career. He would die on the 1st of January 1912. So he has less than 3 years of his life left to live. He's a man who has had a long career. He was born on the 14th of August 1835 at Port Glasgow. He was ordained to the ministry in 1861. He's had a long career, and it's reaching its end. He has retired just a couple of years before from his great life's work, really, which was the work of the Principal of Westmister College, Cambridge. Now, Westminster College, Cambridge, is not a constituent college of the university. It's a theological college located in Cambridge itself. Oswald Dykes, as I said, was born on the 14th of August 1835 in Port Glasgow. He was educated at Dumfries Academy, Edinburgh University, the universities of Heidelberg and Erlangen in Germany, and at New College, Edinburgh. Once again, a New College man coming back to New College to lecture. In 1861, he was appointed Assistant Minister to R.S. Candlish at Free St George's, Edinburgh. Now, R.S. Candlish was the third principal, rather, of New College. He succeeded William Cunningham. He was also the first Cunningham lecturer. I don't have a copy of his Cunningham Lectures on the Fatherhood of God. Oswald Dykes continued as assistant minister until 1864, when ill health meant that he had to resign from Free St George's and travel to Australia. Thankfully, he came from a relatively well-off family, so they could support him travelling for his health. It's something a lot of Victorians, sort of middle class, and upper class Victorians did, travel for your health, and he travelled to Australia. In 1869, he returned to the United Kingdom, but not to Scotland. Instead, he came to London, where he became minister at Regent Square Church. Now, Regent Square Church had been built, the structure had been built as the National Scots Church for none other than Edward Irving, regarded as a forerunner of the charismatic movement. Edward Irving was a charismatic man in both senses of the word. A compelling character, a man of dashing good looks, if we can believe all the portraits of him, but a man who theologically became increasingly odd as time went on, until eventually he was forced out of the church for his unorthodox teachings on the nature of the incarnation. He taught that Jesus took a sinful human nature, not a sinless one. Regent Square Church, however, remained. It was a church in chaos, but thankfully they were able to secure the services of a man called the Reverend James Hamilton, another Scotsman, obviously. Now, Regent Square Church was one of a number of churches in England established in the 19th century for Scottish immigrant populations. Scotsmen, very often merchants of various kinds, moved into England, and they had their own communities. Now, these men were Presbyterians, and they had families who were Presbyterian. But the English Presbyterians basically didn't exist anymore. They'd either gone Unitarian, or they had become Congregationalists. So what happened was these Scots communities set up their own churches, Scots churches. But in 1843, as initially these churches were like the church at Regent Square, they were connected to the Church of Scotland. Now, in 1843 you have disruption, and the disruption of the Church of Scotland, where the Free Church comes out, then leaves the congregations associated with the Church of Scotland in England saying, what are we going to do? And a majority of them decide they too are going to sever the ties with the Church of Scotland, and they're going to become their own presbytery. They unite with secession churches, so what would become the UPs, in England, because there are also secession churches in England, because when people travel and set up their own churches, and you get immigrant communities, you'll find often that the divisions back home are reflected in the congregations that are founded, even if the divisions are founded in something that's got nothing to do with the new country. So in 1844, these Scottish churches in England come together to form an English Presbyterian church. On founding this new English Presbyterian church, they have two main subjects in their minds, two big things to deal with. The first is foreign missions. We need to be an outward-looking missionary church, not just about missions in England, but foreign missions. So we need to have foreign missions. But also, they say we need to have an educated ministry. Presbyterianism emphasizes an educated ministry in a way that other denominations don't necessarily do so. The Methodists, they want some level of education, but Presbyterianism really, really, really emphasizes an educated ministry. At least at its best it does. So they said, we need a theological college. We can't send our people to the Church of Scotland College, in the universities. We can't send our people even, we don't really want to rely upon the Free Church in Scotland. We need our own colleges, or our own college. And so it was that in 1845, rooms were hired in Exeter Hall, which was this great meeting place for evangelicals in London. Now, as they were thinking about founding the college, they looked around, who do we want as sort of the leader? Who do we want to be the founder? And who should they choose but William Cunningham, the man for whom these lectures are named, the man for whom they were, in whose memory they were set up. William Cunningham said no. He was committed to the Free Church of Scotland. He couldn't go to England to start a college from scratch. So instead, they appointed the Reverend Peter Lorimer and the Reverend Hugh Campbell. James Hamilton of Regent Square also assisted in the work, but although they started off with 18 students, which seemed really promising, the following year the numbers went down. In 1847 the numbers had gone down to just one student entering the college that year, and until 1864 no year saw more than 4 new students entering the college. From that date onwards the number was 8, and since it was only a small denomination, then the number was more or less all right for them. But part of the problem was that they were asking 2 men to do the work of a much bigger faculty, because what you need to teach people, you need to teach them Old Testament theology, New Testament theology, church history, systematic theology, pastoral theology, and all of these topics being dealt with by just 2 men. However brilliant they are, they can't manage everything. Visiting lecturers were brought in, but still it was not enough. In 1864, the college fund, however, received £20,000, which was a fortune in those days, from the estate of Mr. William Brownlee, and therefore they were able to acquire their own building, Queen Square House, in Queen Square, London. In 1855, Professor Campbell died, succeeded by Professor Thomas Mackay, the son of the biographer of Knox, and of course the uncle of the Cunningham lecturer for 1892. In 1867, Mackay resigned due to illness. But then they felt that we can appoint a 3rd professor as well. So 3 men now were brought in. And then Robert Barber of Cheshire, Bellsworth Castle, a wealthy man who basically paid for the building of the Presbyterian Church in Chester, a building sadly that's closed a few years ago, I believe now a restaurant. But he paid for a 4th chair. So they now had 4 professors. Professor Lorimer was the principal, Professor William Chalmers, Professor William Gray Elmsley, and Professor William Graham. By the 1880s then, they had a well-equipped college, but a new challenge appeared, because there was now the question, shall we stay in London, or shall we move to Cambridge? London, of course, has many advantages. It's the capital. London has the British Library. But Cambridge, one of the 2 great university cities of England. And so it was that the question was asked, can we move to Cambridge? In 1888, Oswald Dykes was called from Regent Square Church to become the Professor of Systematic Theology and the Principal of what was then the Presbyterian College in London, a college that was now considering moving to Cambridge. Robert Barber again was involved in assistance for that, but also 2 women in Cambridge, Agnes Smith Lewis and Margaret Dunlop Gibson. These 2 indomitable Scots Presbyterian ladies had both been widowed at relatively early ages. They had thrown themselves into exploration. They had gone to Mount Sinai to search out documents in the library of St. Catherine's there. It was a difficult task for them because the depredations of document hunters had led the monks being very suspicious of Westerners wanting to look at the library. But these Scottish sisters were able to persuade the monks to let them have a look and to catalogue the library. The Scots sisters, by their charms, by their winning personalities, won through. And they were established now in Cambridge, associated with St Columba's Presbyterian Church. And so they proposed they would help the move. And so it was that in 1899 rather, the college moved from London to Cambridge. 1907, new buildings were opened. The buildings can still be seen today. That's a picture of them. Those are the Scottish ladies there. And there we are, the cover, Westminster College, Cambridge. 50 years in Cambridge history. It's still there. It's still a theological college. Its theology is not altogether what it ought to be, shall we say. And this was the final great work of Oswald Dykes, to lead the college to Cambridge. Westminster, the name comes from the Westminster Confession of Faith, the Presbyterian confession. He continued his teaching, his administrative work there, until his retirement in 1907. He also found the time to write a number of books. In 1875 he wrote a book, From Jerusalem to Antioch. 1884, the law of the 10 words on the 10 Commandments, of course. 1888, the Gospel according to St Paul. 1892, plain words on great themes. 1908, he produced this volume, The Christian Minister and His Duties. And this is based on his lectures in pastoral theology at the college there in Cambridge. And so it was that in 1909 he delivered his swan song, if you will, The Divine Worker in Creation and Providence. It's a book that reflects in many ways what was wrong with the churches that they didn't recognise was wrong at the time it was written. It's a book that thoroughly embraces the theory of evolution. A book that moves towards a largely mechanistic understanding of the universe. When it speaks of creation, it is creation by evolution, not creation by anything else, not the fiat creation of the book of Genesis. He embraces, of course, the Graf-Wellhausen hypothesis about the formation of the book of Genesis from ill-digested fragments of other works, a position that recommended itself very largely due to strange ideas that people then had about so-called primitive cultures, and because they used the phrase primitive cultures. He writes in his introduction, or rather he writes in his chapter 1, the introduction, the subject of these lectures, it must be owned, is a well-worn one. Lying as it does on the borderland between science and religion, it has long enough been a debatable territory. My purpose, however, was not at all controversial. To reshape the traditional doctrine of creation and providence under the light cast upon both nature and history since the last century opened fresh avenues of study in the ways of God. It is, I think, one of the tasks at present laid upon theology. It is a humble contribution toward this task that these pages are now offered. It's very much an evolutionary book. It's a book that breathes the spirit of a world that has passed away, and that passed away on the battlefields of the First World War, when many of the students who had studied under Oswald Dykes went out as chaplains, or went out indeed as soldiers, and saw horrible things, and man's inhumanity to man. The subject, Dykes says, which I propose to treat in the following chapters, embraces two connected doctrines known in Christian theology as creation and providence, or more broadly stated, what the Christian religion has to teach concerning the relations of God to the world, and to man considered as part of it. Obviously, he goes on, these tenets are neither central in the Christian faith nor peculiar to it. As the religion of redemption from sin, Christianity enclosed a group of characteristic mysteries, revealed, as it believed, through a series of supernatural events in the person and work of Jesus Christ. Chief among these are three: the Trinity of God, the Incarnation, and the Atonement, with its experienced consequences. These constitute the sacred central possession of our faith, its holy of holies. On these it claims to be practically the sole witness. And this illustrates how it was that someone like Dykes, who in many ways still held orthodox beliefs on those things, could nevertheless completely embrace an evolutionary idea that is basically Darwinism. And he did it by isolating these things from those things. The century and more that have passed since he wrote have demonstrated the impossibility of doing so. We cannot now isolate these things as he did. Still, there are flashes of brilliance and thought here. He speaks of the pangs of nature, dealing with, as Paul says, that the whole creation is groaning. He writes of providence. What is providence? But the age-long worldwide labour for man's deliverance, of the same divine lover of men, whose redeeming passion was consummated upon the cross. In many ways it's a frustrating book, but a very typical one for the age in which it was written. An age that believed that things were getting better all the time. An age that could not have imagined the catastrophe, that did not imagine the catastrophe about to burst upon it, that would bring an end to these things, and bring in a new period of angst and trouble and trials for the churches, a period in which we now live, of trial and difficulty, of struggle. But we struggle knowing that God is indeed the divine worker who is working in the providence of the world, and who has made all things, and who will bring in a new creation, a new heavens and earth, in which righteousness dwells. Well, thank you for watching. I've gone on a bit long about the Presbyterians in England, and perhaps said relatively little about the book, but it's a difficult book to say much about at this time. But may God bless you and keep you close to his book, the Bible. God bless you and keep you.